I know exactly why you are here today. You're the kind of person well, who really thrives on that sudden rush of realization.
Right, that aha moment.
Exactly. That brilliant moment when a fragmented piece of scientific history suddenly just clicks into place and completely reorients the way you look at the natural world around you.
It changes everything.
It really does. And you want to bypass the superficial summaries, skip the elementary breakdowns, and dive straight into the deep end of the data.
Which is exactly what we're doing.
Yes, you are in luck today because this deep dive takes a concept you likely assume is entirely settled science, and we're just going to utterly dismantle it. We're synthesizing a massive amount of phylogenetic data, pulling directly from a highly detailed Wikipedia article and its foundational scientific references to examine this prehistoric lineage known as the roachoid.
It is a phenomenal topic.
Yeah.
And our mission today is highly specific.
Yeah.
We are going to deconstruct a very pervasive biological myth. The objective is to demonstrate that the cockroach we recognize today is absolutely not the static, unchanging, indestructible living fossil from the Carboniferous period that pop science always portrays.
Right, it's not some immortal bug.
Not at all. By analyzing the roachoid stem group, we're going to trace the surprisingly volatile evolutionary family tree of some of the most morphologically diverse insects on Earth.
Okay, let's unpack this because the idea of the eternal cockroach is so deeply embedded in our cultural lexicon. I mean, it's the ultimate dinner party trivia, right?
Oh, definitely.
The notion that if you could somehow look under a rotting fern in the Paleozoic era, you'd see the exact same insect that's currently living behind your refrigerator.
Completely untouched by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary pressure.
Exactly. We treat them as these weird biological anomalies that somehow just opted out of natural selection entirely.
And that enduring cultural image is just wildly inaccurate. The fossil record tells a vastly more dynamic story.
Yeah.
When paleontologists actually excavate primitive fossilized insects from Paleozoic strata, they are definitely not uncovering modern cockroaches.
They're finding something else.
Right. They are identifying a distinct, primitive group of insects formerly classified as roachoids. You'll also see them widely referenced in the paleontological literature as roachids, blattioids, or Eoblattidae.
Eoblattidae, literally meaning the dawn of the roach.
Exactly.
But given their taxonomic classification as an extinct paraphyletic stem group, we know we aren't just looking at a direct, unbroken, linear clone.
No, not at all.
Because they're paraphyletic, we are looking at a foundational lineage that spawned multiple distinct descendant branches, while the original stem group itself eventually hit an evolutionary dead end.
What's fascinating here is how broad that evolutionary branching actually is.
It's crazy.
It really is. Discoveries in phylogenetic analyses synthesized since the mid-20th century have definitively proven that these roachoids are the foundational ancestors of the entire superorder Dictyoptera.
Meaning they're the forerunners to a lot more than just the bugs under your sink.
Exactly. It means this specific ancient stem group provides the fundamental architectural blueprint, not just for modern cockroaches, but for the entire taxonomic umbrella that includes the highly eusocial termites and the radically specialized praying mantises.
I want you, the listener, to really visualize that phylogenetic divergence for a moment. Just picture the biomechanics of a termite colony systematically dismantling a fallen tree through specialized gut microbiomes and rigid caste systems.
It's a highly complex setup.
Right. Now contrast that with a praying mantis and apex micropredator with these raptorial forelegs evolved specifically for lethal high-speed ambushes.
Pure carnivore.
And finally, consider your standard hyper-adaptable scavenging urban cockroach. It is an incredible testament to evolutionary plasticity that all three of these radically different biological strategies share the exact same primitive blattioid blueprint.
It really highlights how a robust foundational morphology can just be pulled in wildly different directions by localized environmental pressures.
Yeah, the baseline gets warped.
Exactly. The roachoid body plan offered a highly successful baseline. Over millions of years, as populations isolated and faced distinct ecological challenges, that baseline changed.
Depending on what they were eating.
Precisely. The lineages that adapted to specific dietary niches involving cellulose degradation developed eusociality and became termites. The lineages that adapted to hypercarnivorous niches refined their visual acuity and appendage morphology to become mantises.
And the ones that just ate everything.
The lineages that doubled down on the ultimate generalist scavenging lifestyle refined themselves into the modern cockroaches. But they all radiate from that original Carboniferous stem group.
Knowing that the roachoid is the progenitor for such a diverse superorder, it makes their specific anatomical baseline incredibly important.
It does.
If you look at the fossilized morphology of a late Carboniferous roachoid, the visual parallel to a modern roach is undeniable. They possess that classic large, disc-like pronotum shielding the majority of the head and thorax.
That classic shield shape.
Right. They featured the long, filamentous antenna, crucial for sensing in dense environments, laterally compressed flat bodies designed for exploiting tight crevices, and legs optimized for rapid, sustained running rather than jumping or sustained flight.
And the biomechanical similarities are striking, extending all the way down to the microstructures of their wings.
This part is so cool.
The morphological evidence points to a very specific anatomical fingerprint in their heavily veined wing structures. It's the presence of a distinct arched cup vein.
The cup vein is such a fascinating taxonomic marker.
It really is.
It's not just an arbitrary line. That specific arched vein structure plays a critical role in the mechanical folding and structural integrity of the wing, and it's a defining characteristic of modern cockroach wings today.
Which is a huge structural link.
Seeing that exact same stress-bearing architecture in a 300-million-year-old fossil solidifies the mechanical link between the ancient stem group and its modern descendants.
Furthermore, their ecological niche was virtually identical to the generalist strategy we see today. The stratum data indicates they were swift, agile inhabitants of the leaf litter.
Scurrying around the forest floor.
Yeah. The Carboniferous forest floors were incredibly dense, chaotic environments, and the roachoids thrived there as highly efficient detritivores, subsisting on a widely diverse diet of decaying plant matter, fungal spores, and dead animal tissue.
They were essentially the primary biorecyclers of the Paleozoic ecosystem.
Exactly.
Which is arguably the most stable ecological niche a species can occupy. When your primary energy source is the inevitable decay of everything else in the ecosystem, you are highly insulated against localized food shortages.
There's always going to be dead stuff to eat.
Always. But we have to factor in the atmospheric conditions of the Paleozoic era, specifically the significantly higher oxygen concentrations, because it allowed these detritivores to scale up massively.
Oh, absolutely.
We aren't just talking about the size of a standard kitchen pest here.
Not at all. The sheer physical dimensions of some Carboniferous taxa are formidable.
When you look at species like Progonoblatina and Nesmolacris, you realize we are talking about absolute giants.
Massive insects.
We're looking at fossil specimens reaching around 9 centimeters in total length.
Almost 4 inches.
Yeah, for a dense, ground-dwelling, heavily armored insect, 3.5 inches of pure running mass is incredibly substantial.
It represents the upper limits of oxygen diffusion across an insect's tracheal system.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We naturally assume these massive dimensions are strictly relegated to the prehistoric past.
Right, because oxygen levels drop.
But the fossil data highlights another prehistoric giant, Opsiomolacris, which possessed a wingspan of roughly 7.5 centimeters.
A huge wingspan.
But if we map that against modern entomological data, we find that the largest modern cockroach currently alive, Megaloblatta longipennis, exhibits almost the exact same dimensions.
It's basically 1-to-1 match.
It proves that while the overarching atmospheric conditions have changed, the Dictyoptera lineage retains the genetic capacity to express those massive phenotypes when localized tropical conditions permit it.
That is a critical observation.
Yeah.
It proves that size reduction in modern lineages wasn't necessarily a hard-coded evolutionary loss.
It was more of an adjustment.
Right, an adaptive calibration to changing oxygen levels and shifting predation pressures. But while their overall body plan and potential for massive size remained somewhat consistent, we really have to examine the physiological mechanics that firmly separate the extinct roachoid stem group from true modern Dictyopterans.
And that's all in the reproduction.
Exactly. The most profound divergence is hidden in the reproductive anatomy.
This is where the living fossil myth completely falls apart for me. The reproductive strategies are completely alien to one another.
They are night and day.
The phylogenetic data shows that female roachoids universally possessed a well-developed, elongated external ovipositor,
Which fundamentally alters our understanding of their behavioral ecology. Because modern cockroaches, mantises, and termites absolutely do not utilize external ovipositors.
Having a long, rigid appendage extending from the abdomen means these ancient insects weren't passively dropping eggs on the surface.
No, they were drilling.
They were actively utilizing that ovipositor to bore into the substrate. They were likely driving those ovipositors deep into the damp carboniferous soil, piercing the bark of rotting lycopsid trees, or burying their eggs deep within the dense, decaying plant matter on the forest floor.
Much like we see in modern parasitic wasps or certain orthopterans.
And that behavioral reality forces us to look closely at the defining synapomorphy of the Dictyoptera superorder.
Right, the evolutionary leap.
As we trace the lineage forward, we see a massive shift where that external ovipositor is entirely abandoned in favor of a completely novel reproductive technology.
The Uthica.
The Uthica, the specialized, heavily sclerotized egg pod. When we look at the synapomorphy of the Uthica, it represents an incredible shift in metabolic investment.
It's a genius adaptation.
Instead of expending energy boring into the soil to deposit individual vulnerable eggs, the modern Dictyopteran lineage evolved the glandular capacity to secrete a structural foam.
Which hardens perfectly.
Yes, it hardens into a protective, leathery casing, encasing dozens of eggs simultaneously. For you listening, this is a prime example of evolutionary problem solving.
And the ecological advantages of the Uthica cannot be overstated.
It's portable armor.
By manufacturing a portable, highly durable microenvironment, the Dictyopteran lineage decoupled its reproductive success from the immediate condition of the substrate. And Uthica provides extraordinary defense against desiccation, parasitoid wasps, and fungal infections.
Which were probably everywhere.
Oh, they were likely the primary pressures decimating roachoid eggs buried in the damp Paleozoic soil.
It makes you wonder about the specific environmental catalyst that drove that shift. It's easy to look at the transition to the Uthica egg pod and call it a strict linear upgrade. But given how wildly successful the roachoids were for tens of millions of years utilizing an external ovipositor, there must have been a severe, localized environmental pressure that forced that evolutionary leap.
Something broke their system.
Was it a massive spike in specialized egg predators, or did a shift in global humidity make the soil an unviable incubator?
We might never know the exact trigger.
But whatever the catalyst, evolutionary problem-solving engineered a brilliant solution. Stop relying on the environment to protect your offspring and synthesize the protection yourself.
And because the termite, the mantis, and the modern cockroach all utilize variations of the Uthica, the phylogenetic timeline dictates that their distinct lineages must have diverged from the main blatttoid stock after this critical synapomorphy developed.
They all inherited it from that one ancestor.
Right. But while the modern lineages were securing their evolutionary future with the Uthica, the foundational roachoid stem group was actively attempting its own radical adaptations. They were not biologically stagnant.
Not at all. We see that plasticity brilliantly preserved in the fossil record, specifically within the amber deposits.
The amber data is just incredible.
The paleontological data out of Myanmar, focusing on Burmese amber dating back roughly 100 million years to the Cretaceous period, reveals some of the youngest known roachoids. And they look absolutely nothing like the flat, ground-scuttling detritivores of the Carboniferous.
The specimens identified as Encyclopedic and Procerblata are truly remarkable.
They're bizarre.
The literature classifies them as atypical long-tailed roachoids, but their morphology is a jarring departure from the standard blattoid blueprint. They present a morphological profile that shockingly mimics the biomechanics and visual profile of modern tree crickets.
A completely different spatial orientation.
Entirely.
They traded the laterally compressed, tight crevice armor for a build optimized for clinging to thin stems and navigating open foliage.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can map this radical morphological shift directly to one of the most disruptive ecological events in Earth's history, the angiosperm terrestrial revolution.
The explosive evolutionary radiation of flowering plants.
Exactly.
It is fascinating how the sudden dominance of angiosperms completely re-engineered the physical architecture of the terrestrial world. Before the Cretaceous, terrestrial biomes were dominated by ferns, conifers, and cycads.
Very different ground cover.
When angiosperms rapidly diversified, they didn't just add flowers, they introduced entirely new vertical complexities, intricate canopy layers, novel chemical defenses, and unprecedented nutrient sources in the form of complex nectars and pollens.
It was an ecological gold rush.
A completely new frontier.
The emergence of these complex, three-dimensional floral environments created millions of newly available ecological niches. The ancestral ground-dwelling roachoids, specifically lineages like Encyclopedic, were clearly experiencing immense pressure to exploit these new vertical habitats.
So they climbed up.
So we see this incredible morphological pivot. They abandon millions of years of successful flat leaf litter adaptations to stretch out, elongate their appendages, and become tree cricket mimics capable of navigating the complex architecture of early angiosperms.
It is the ultimate proof of their evolutionary plasticity. They weren't just stubbornly clinging to the dirt, they were actively chasing the changing biome up into the canopy.
They tried to adapt.
But unfortunately for the stem group, mimicking a tree cricket wasn't enough to secure their long-term survival against the highly optimized modern lineages that were rapidly claiming dominance.
No, it wasn't. The phylogenetic timeline clearly charts their inevitable displacement. The rochoid stem group originates and thrives in the late Carboniferous. However, the divergence point, the origin of modern Dictyopteran groups from that foundational Blatopteran stock, doesn't occur until much later, deep into the early Jurassic.
So the early Jurassic acts as the true incubator for the modern morphology.
Yes.
If you are tracking the specific origin point of the modern cockroach, you don't look to the Carboniferous.
Precisely. The taxonomic data strictly classifies the earliest modern cockroaches as appearing in the late Jurassic.
That completely shatters the timeline of the living fossil myth.
It really does.
If you were trekking through a Carboniferous forest, you would absolutely see rochoids navigating the detritus with their long ovipositors. But you would not encounter a single modern cockroach until the late Jurassic, sharing the ecosystem with Stegosaurus and Allosaurus.
And as those modern cockroaches, equipped with their highly efficient oothecae, began to aggressively radiate alongside the early termites and mantises, the competitive exclusion became insurmountable.
They got outcompeted.
The modern lineages simply outmaneuvered their ancestors. By the time we reached the Cretaceous period, the exact era when those tree cricket-mimicking rochoids were being encased in Burmese amber, the entire rochoid stem group had become a rare, marginalized relic.
They were actively being pushed out of their own ecological niches by their specialized descendants.
The fossil record shows a terminal decline. Ultimately, the entire paraphyletic stem group succumbed to extinction before the close of the Cretaceous.
So they didn't even make it past the dinosaurs.
Right. The foundational rochoid died out, leaving only the highly derived synapomorphy-bearing Dictyoptera branches to survive the KPG extinction event and inherit the Cenozoic era.
So what does this all mean? Let's zoom out and synthesize the journey we just mapped.
It's a big shift in perspective.
It is. If there is one critical takeaway for you, the listener, it is that the concept of the immortal, unchanging, ancient cockroach is a biological ghost story unsupported by phylogenetic data.
Pure myth.
The massive insect utilizing its cup-veined wings to navigate the Carboniferous leaf litter was an Eoblatidea, a rochoid. It was a paraphyletic ancestor that bored its eggs into the substrate with an external ovipositor.
Yep.
Through intense ecological pressures and the revolutionary metabolic shift to the Ootheca egg pod, that single architectural blueprint fractured. It gave rise to the cellulose-digesting eusocial termite, the hyperlethal raptorial praying mantis, and the highly optimized generalist we recognize as the modern cockroach.
A massively successful divergence.
And while those modern lineages conquered the globe, the original rochoids, despite a brilliant last-ditch effort to morph into tree crickets during the angiosperm revolution, ultimately faded into the geological record, entirely extinct by the end of the Cretaceous.
It forces us to view the lineage not as a static survivor, but as an engine of extreme morphological innovation. And this raises an important question, an entirely new vector for us to consider.
Okay, where are we going with this?
Well, we have spent this deep dive mapping how the Dictyoptera lineage survived the massive terrestrial plant revolution, intense predation shifts, and global extinction events through rapid, radical biological reengineering.
A lineage defined by its sheer refusal to stop adapting.
Exactly. So, consider the modern cockroach, not as an evolutionary endpoint, but as a heavily coiled spring.
A coiled spring.
Think about it. Today, human beings are rapidly expanding our own technological footprints, launching spacecraft, and actively engineering artificial enclosed habitats intended for off-world colonization.
Oh, wow. Space roaches.
Given what we now know about the extreme evolutionary plasticity of the blatoid blueprint, what morphological shifts might occur in a population of modern cockroaches that inevitably hitches a ride to a zero-gravity, sterile environment, like a lunar base or a Martian colony?
Because they will hitch a ride.
It's almost guaranteed. Without the constraints of Earth's gravity or traditional terrestrial predators, and faced with entirely artificial substrates, will the Dictyoptera lineage abandon the Ootheca? Will they lose their running legs in favor of localized zero-G propulsion?
Will the next major branch of the rochoid family tree be fundamentally extraterrestrial? It is an incredible thought experiment. Imagine a deep future phylogenetic tree where the divergence point isn't the Jurassic period, but the launch of a Mars transport vessel.
It's fascinating to think about.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep examining the data, keep questioning the consensus, and we will catch you next time.